In the spring of 1943, there was a group of Jewish families who fled the horrors of the Third Reich. They disappeared for almost 2 years into the priest's Grotto, which was a mammoth underground cave in the wheat fields of western Ukraine. For half a century, their story was largely unknown until Chris, our guest speaker, discovered the remnants of their refuge and uncovered this incredible tale. National Geographic recently published this nearly forgotten story of courage, of loyalty, and survival. The story has been covered on NBC's Today Show, National Public Radio, the BBC, Reader's Digest, and many other periodicals and newspapers. A lifelong adventurer, we've been asking him what he does in his spare time. Our guest speaker has had a fascinating career in scuba diving, caving, skydiving, mountain climbing, marathon running, and just about every other adventure you can think of. He currently is working for the New York State Education Department as a senior investigator and is pursuing an advanced degree in forensic science. For our interest tonight, Chris is going to be speaking from his book, The Secret of the Priest's Grotto, a Holocaust survival story. And we have a limited number of copies of this book that will be in the foyer after the meeting is over. And Chris has promised to go back and will be there to sign the books. So let's give Chris Nicola a great Texas welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to Texas.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Richard. Thank you for having me. As you heard, I'm a caver. Now, some people call us spelunkers, some people call us underground geologists, and some people just call us downright insane. Now, the question usually arises, why do people like myself cave? Why do we go underground? Well, the first answer in my case is easy. When I was growing up, my mother wouldn't let me play in the mud. I've been playing in the mud a good many places now. But I think the number one reason that people cave is that adrenaline rush you get when you're the first person to see something that no other living human being has ever seen. You may go in a cave that's been known for several hundred years, and you may make a left-hand turn instead of a right-hand turn, and in so doing see passageways that no one else has ever seen. Or you may lift that rock out of your way instead of climbing over it, and in so doing find a new life form or a life form long thought to be extinct. Or you hear the stories occasionally of buried treasure, of jewels, or valuable gems, such as the gem of the story I'm going to tell you tonight, about how 38 courageous Jews survived one of the most horrific times in the last 100 years. Could we get the lights, please? And the next slide. Okay, as was mentioned, this article, or the story, first came to the public's attention in the June-July edition of National Geographic's Adventure magazine. It was actually 15 pages, and it was the first time Adventure magazine had this dilemma of, we can't cut anything out because the story is so valuable, so they had a dual issue, June and July. Next. Our story takes place near that red circle. It's important to keep in mind that every Jew I'm about to tell you about tonight was born in that area when it was part of Poland. After the Second World War, that became part of Western Ukraine. But that red dot is the caving area that we're going to focus on tonight. In 1939, Stalin and Hitler signed a non-aggression pact. In 1941, though, Hitler ordered his troops eastward into Western Ukraine. He didn't waste much time. The death camps, some of them were already in place. Hitler had a special purpose for this area of the world, much different than the other occupied areas controlled by the Nazis. Hitler wanted to reserve this area for the expansion of the Aryan race at the conclusion of the Second World War. And with that in mind, he assembled special SS troops, and forgive my pronunciation here, called the Eisengruppen, 6,000 to 8,000 brutal troops. And they had one mission, and one mission only, and that was the liquidation of the Jewish population by any means necessary. There are records in Nuremberg, in the transcripts, of Wehrmacht officers on the regular army in the front lines objecting to the brutality of the SS troops. The friction between the SS troops and the Wehrmacht on the front line got so bad that at one point Himmler sent down a directive. And he made it clear. He said on the front lines of Wehrmacht, the regular army was in charge, no one was to interfere. But it went on to say that behind the lines, no one, even the Wehrmacht, was not to interfere with the SS's function, otherwise they would be put to death as well. Why was Western Ukraine probably one of the worst places to be if you were Jewish at that time? Not that there were very many nice places in Europe at that time. Well, number one, the soil there is very fertile. It has to do with the way the Carpathian Mountains were created millions of years before, 90 miles south of this area. And the topsoil is about 30 or 40 feet deep, and it's extremely fertile. So the crop productions were massive. So obviously both the Germans and the Soviets wanted this area, known as the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. I just explained Hitler's plan about eliminating the Jewish population. The Germans wanted to conquer Stalingrad, which was due east. And the reason they wanted to conquer Stalingrad was twofold. Number one, they felt that if they conquered Stalingrad, the symbolism would affect the will of the Russian soldiers to fight. The second reason they wanted to conquer Stalingrad was to get control of the petroleum fields south of Stalingrad. Now, the population in this area was about 1/3 Polish, 1/3 Ukrainian, 1/3 Jewish. And as one of the survivors told me from this story, whether the Soviets were in charge or the Germans were in charge, there was anti-Semitism. Stalin initiated a scorched earth policy when the Germans started to proceed into this area. He wanted to make sure there were no resources that could be used by the German army. Anything that could not be lifted into the back of trucks or put on trains and sent deep into the interior of the Soviet Union was burnt to the ground. Thousands of head of cattle and horses were destroyed. Railroad tracks were actually lifted from the foundation and melted. He even went further. He wanted to make sure that no type of Vichy-style government was in place, meaning he didn't want any government administrators or officials there that would work with the German army. So he exiled all those people that knew how to handle or control a government. So what do you have in the middle of a war zone with no government structure and complete chaos and anti-Semitism? You have carnage and chaos. I think what perfectly illustrates the plight of the Jewish population in this area is Marc Chagall's White Crucifixion. On one side you had the Red Army, on one side you had the Nazis. And in the middle, with no place to go, is the Jewish population. No place to go, except in the case of 38 courageous Jews from 5 families, including the Sturmer family, pictured here, with Esther Sturmer, the matriarch, sitting up front. Now, this area, by the way, this is looking down at a cave. This area is known among geologists and cavers all around the world because of the rare, huge gypsum caves. Now, these caves are not only unique because they're massive, but they have this labyrinth-type pattern. It can be compared to what you see on a broken windshield of a car. So its labyrinths can easily get you lost. Many locals in this area can tell you stories about how people wandered into these caves and disappeared and were never found. Such as this gentleman who wandered into the cave in 1908 and wasn't found until 1963. One of the caves in this area is the 3rd longest cave in the world, Otimissichskaya. It's over 150 miles long. Just to let you know, the longest cave in the world is Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. It's over 365 miles long. I spent over a decade doing this project of researching the story. I first heard the rumor and legend in 1993, 94, 95. I went there every year. I've been going there every year since 93. And I heard the story when old farmers would come to me and say they think some Jews may have lived in the caves during the Holocaust. But there was a language problem and there was no specifics being given. So what I would do is every year before I would leave Ukraine, I would give a list of things to be done to my colleagues in the caving community over there, of where I would like them to do some research, where I would like them to go. And meanwhile, back in the U.S., I would visit museums, libraries, bookstores, looking in the back of books for key words like Jewish cave dweller, Western Ukraine, trying to find out if this story was just a rumor or a legend. I got a couple of hits. In 1999, I was given a manuscript, a trip journal entry written in Ukrainian by way of several people. They came from an older caver. And it was in Ukrainian. I don't speak or write or read Ukrainian, so I got some limited information. That was something I had to develop further. I also found a copy of an old Jewish Times article, and in it, there was an interview of a doctor in Atlanta, Georgia, that was running an adoption agency for Ukrainian children, and he was Jewish. And the reporter asked him, why would you, a Jew, run an adoption agency for Ukrainian children in light of some of the reports of the hostilities that were committed against the Jews in that area? His answer fascinated me. He said it was a way to say thank you to several loyal Ukrainians that helped his mother and 37 of his friends and relatives survive the Holocaust by living in the cave. So that was another lead. Well, I was getting discouraged by the end of the 90s. I wasn't getting anything definite. But I came across an internet site, a sophisticated genealogical research site, where Jews could go every day, thousands could go and look up birth records and wedding records as far back as the 1890s. And they could spell the names of people phonetically and spell the names of villages long lost and gone. And I started to realize something. Every day, thousands of Jews over the world were going to this site. So I got an idea. If I picked the right keywords and embedded them in my website, perhaps, if this story was true, some relative someday doing research would find a way to my site. In December 2002, I got an email from a gentleman identifying himself as Ed Vogel, the son-in-law of Saul Wexler, who survived the Holocaust with 37 friends and relatives by living in a cave for 1 year. And Ed Vogel and Saul Wexler were living 7 miles away from me. From Ed, I got a copy of Esther Sturmer's memoirs that she wrote in 1963. And I also got a lot of information from what his father-in-law had told him. Most importantly, though, Peter Taylor, my co-author, and I, we found out that there were 2 caves involved. Before they spent 344 days in Priest Grotto as a group of 38, 28 of them stayed in the cave for 6 months called Viteba. And now we also had the names of the occupants in Viteba and also Priest Grotto. So our expedition starts in July 2003, funded by National Geographic Venture magazine. And they said they were interested in the story, but one thing, they wouldn't make a commitment to publish anything unless we brought them back physical evidence that this story took place. So Peter and I went to Western Ukraine in 2003, and the first thing we wanted to investigate was the story about Viteba, the bad cave. And you will understand shortly why it's called the bad cave. It's important when you do research like this that you do not inevitably give the subject you're interviewing the answer you want to get back. With that in mind, Peter and I did not tell Mikhail Shahatsky, the curator of the Borshoff Museum here, the true nature of our, back please, the true nature of I'm sorry, I talk by my hands sometimes. I'm from New York, so I have to hold on to this. We didn't tell him the true nature of our investigation, i.e., did Jews survive the Holocaust by living in a cave? Instead, we told Shahatsky that National Geographic wanted us to write a story about the history of these caves. Doing that actually made our story more valuable and gave it more depth. By the way, the most common word heard between Peter and I was serendipitous. This story eventually took on a life of its own, and it just grew, and we just followed the path. This was the first instance. So Michal showed us the first map made of this cave, and that's what you see on the left of your screen. It was made in 1852 by some archaeologists out of Krakow. And remember, this was part of Poland back then. And the cave gained international notoriety in archaeological circles because these archaeologists discovered evidence, such as the pottery charge pictured on the right, that as far back as 3,000 years ago, the local people would survive invading armies by taking refuge in the caves. What's interesting is every one of the 38 Jews I'm about to tell you about tonight learned that fact in elementary school. They knew it could be done. Shortly after the Germans arrived, they conducted roundups. In one such roundup, 12-year-old Saul Wexler was forced with about 50 other residents into a field. And then in groups of 5 or 6, they were marched up to a pit that had wooden planks. Before they walked on the planks, they were ordered to take off their clothes, put them in a pile. Then they went out to the end of the planks, and they were shot. Saul Wexler does not know how long he was unconscious for, but when he woke up, he had a head wound that had knocked him out, and he was covered in blood, and he had to climb out under the bodies of others, some who were still dying. The only place he could find refuge was that pile of clothes. He crawled into those clothes to hide. Short time after, a truck pulls up, and it's being driven by his neighbor, Ukrainian policeman. Now, the Ukrainian police, in most cases, were working with the Nazis. His neighbor saw Saul, and he told him, "Do not talk, do not move. I'm going to pick you up with the clothes, put you in the back of the truck, and then when we go by your house, I'm going to stop. You are not to say a word. You will get out and run to your house." And this is how Saul Wexler survived for another day. The truck was then taken to a nearby location where, under the eyes of the Germans, locals were forced to search the clothes for hidden jewelry and money. Obviously now, the Wexler family and the Sturmer family, the cousins and others in the area realized they had to find somewhere to go. But where? This is a picture of a Tabor cave in 2003. Peter's getting ready to go into it. By comparison to the other caves in this area, the Tabor is a small cave. It's only 4.5 miles long. But that's 4.5 miles if you know how many lefts, how many rights, and in what order. Otherwise, it's infinitely long. So in October 1942, the Sturmer family, the Wexler family, a total of 28 people went into the Tabor cave. Now, some will ask, why in the world would they go into what was called a commercial cave, meaning you could pay 25 cents to a local guide, and a local guide would take you on a tour of the cave with a gas lamp? Well, they had no other place to go. It was the middle of the winter. Russian winters and Ukrainian winters are brutal. And they were in the middle of a war zone. So for the moment, the Sturmers and Wexlers figured this was their best chance. So they went in the cave. Next slide, please. So what waited for them in the cave? Well, isolation, hypothermia. Many of you have probably heard of mountain climbers that have died of exposure. Well, what that is that's when you're in an environment that's so cold that your body starts to shut down. First the arms, then the legs, and then your outer organs. And if left untreated, your inner organs shut down, including your brain and heart. So it can be fatal. The average temperature in these caves was 52 degrees Fahrenheit, 100% humidity. Keep in mind, the people I'm telling you about were amateurs. They didn't go into these caves with the $200 or $300 worth of equipment that I routinely use. They went in as amateurs, and you're going to see that they taught themselves to be world-class explorers and adventurers. Bats covered the ceiling of this cave, and like all living things, bats go to the bathroom. There were deposits of guano over a good portion of the floor. How did they get food? 3 members of this group of 28 had a little money. They went to the local Nazi commandant and bribed him to give them medal collection badges. That allowed them to go around with a horse-drawn cart and collect scrap metal for the Nazis. Most importantly, it gave them the ability one night a week, late at night in darkness, to bring food to the entrance of the cave, but never any beverages. For liquids, the cave dwellers had to put cups underneath formations and collect the water droplets. And if they were lucky, they would get half a cup of water a day. They tried to cook. Esther talks about one episode where they were cooking, and they went to wake up her 4-year-old niece, Seema, and they found out she wasn't sleeping. She was suffocating. They took her to the entrance and revived her, and then they didn't try to cook in that cave anymore. They had to live in constant fear. They never knew, if somebody would stumble across them. Darkness. Keep in mind, if they use their candles, they would have to replace the candles. So they use everything very frugally. They were only in candlelight 2 to 3 times a day, never longer than 5 to 10 minutes. For when they were taking a shovel to go to a place that they designated as latrine, for when they were preparing the food. And so they never really saw much of that cave. And what happens is, in the absence of the sun, we all have natural biorhythms that take over. We don't really live on a 24-hour cycle biologically. So the natural biorhythms took over. We call these circadian rhythms. And after a while, they were sleeping 17 to 20 hours at a time, and they were awake 20 to 24 hours. Here, Shahatsky showed me one of the alcoves that was inhabited by the Sturmers and others, but also the ancients that built the original walls. At one time, those walls went all the way up to the top. Staying in there with 8 to 10 people in one of these little alcoves and putting a canvas sack over the doorway would serve to lower the humidity. So in a period of 2 weeks, the area inside became drier. What's interesting is 3 of the teenagers that worked on rebuilding these walls in 1942 were the Sturmer brothers. Eventually, they find themselves in Winnipeg in the late 40s, early 50s, and they're building concrete slabs. And they team up with another Ukrainian Jewish boy near them who's building chicken coops. And they put their heads together and they said to him, if you build chicken coops larger and put more windows and doors, and you put them on our concrete slabs, and we make the slabs bigger, we could sell them as houses. Today, the 2 surviving Sturmer brothers own one of the largest construction companies in Montreal. Next slide. Here, our young guide, Ukrainian guy, Sasha Zamil, is looking at the remains of one of the stoves used in Vitebsk. 4 months into the stay in Vitebsk, Esther reported in a book, they came across one of these formations. This is indicative when there's a weak spot in the ceiling and it collapses from the surface. She went on to say that they got this idea that perhaps they should take advantage of that and dig an emergency escape tunnel just in case they need it. They took 2 weeks and they dug 40 feet up and they built an elaborate trap door that can not only be camouflage but could also support the weight of horses and cows in the field above. Unfortunately, 2 months later, they had to use that trap door, and this is 6 months into their stay, when 2 German soldiers came in and found them deep in the back of the cave. By the way, by now, they had found an area of the cave that no one knew about. They were in a horseshoe-shaped passage about 80 feet long, each family spaced about 15 feet. Well, the first family that the Germans confronted when they came in this little portal was the Sturmer-Wexler family. Esther reported in her book how she intentionally, loudly confronted them. Why? So the others in the darkness behind would hear what was going on. And then they scurried away in the darkness or hid under beds. So that helped save the others. So as far as the 2 Germans knew, all the occupants were in front of them, 8 of them. They start to march them out of the cave. There's a narrow passageway which is about shoulder width that they're going through, and it keeps changing angle. At one point, Esther Sturmer realized that neither the German behind the line or German in front could see what she was doing. She puts her hand over her son Sam's mouth, he's 15, and pulls him to the side with her, and they lay there in a darkened alcove as everybody walks by. A little further down, Letche Wexler, the mother of Saul, does something similar, but she chooses not to save her own life. She put her hand over 12-year-old Saul's mouth in front of her, pushed him in a darkened alcove, and Saul fell down in the darkness and just lay there and didn't move. And as you're going to find out, that's the last time he sees his mother and 9-year-old brother. When the Germans take the prisoners outside the cave, they got 5 people. 4-year-old Seema, her mother, her uncle, 9-year-old Leo, the brother of Saul, and Saul's mother. The prisoners are then given over to the Ukrainian police with orders to execute them in 2 days. Next slide. Now a rather macabre story begins. You remember the 3 people with the metal collection badges. They take the limited money they have and they go to a Ukrainian doctor who agrees to act as an intermediary for them, and they approach the Ukrainian commandant and they bribe him. And he agrees to stage a phony execution in order to let the 5 prisoners go. But there's a condition. To make sure the local villagers don't know what's going on because they don't want to be executed by the Nazis for doing this, the Ukrainian commander says, you must deliver 5 bodies to us, so the locals will see 5 bodies after they hear the gunshots. That night, the 3 of them, Zeta Sturmer, Fishkel Dodik, his nephew, and Nathan Sturmer, the oldest of the 3 Sturmer brothers, go to a nearby cemetery looking for bodies. And they have a problem. They find 3 adult bodies. They can't find the bodies of 2 children. The Ukrainian commander tells them that he doesn't care. If they don't have all 5 bodies to him by the next night, he will kill all 5 prisoners. The next night, they go to the Borshoff ghetto, which is about 13 miles away, and they are successful in finding the bodies of 2 small children. But something goes wrong, and they're delayed. And when they get back to the Jewish cemetery outside of Bischofsleuter, they hear the gunshots, and out of the woods come 4-year-old Seema in the arms of her uncle, followed by the mother. But Letche Wexler and Leo Wexler were murdered in the pit. Meanwhile, this woman we met in 2004, she lives about 1,500 feet from the entrance of the Jewish cemetery, and she remembers coming across 2 bodies after the night I just described, and she was having nightmares, and she told her father, and her father buried the bodies, and she indicated to us where they were buried. We're trying to work with forensic anthropologists now to see if we can go back and unearth the bodies and do DNA sequencing to find out if these bodies are indeed Letcher and Leo Wexler. Next slide. Meanwhile, 23 people are still in the cave. In Esther's book, she describes how in complete darkness, in 3 hours, they all found their way to the base of the emergency tunnel. They climbed out. They could see the Nazis and the Ukrainian police in the distance. They were in an open field. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. They crawled into the field. And then for the next 3 or 4 weeks, some of them stayed in Anne Frank-type bunkers at the top of barns or little caves dug under fireplaces at the homes of several loyal Poles or Ukrainians. Some stayed in the woods. But Esther put in a book that they had to find someplace, but she also mentioned wherever place they find, they want to be masters of their own fate. And she ruled out staying in the homes of any Poles or Ukrainians because she said, despite how good their intentions are, everybody knew one thing. The Germans knocked on the door and said, I'll give you a choice. Your family or the families you're hiding, they would be given up. Next slide. Well, about 3 weeks after this, the Dodik brothers and their cousins, the 3 Sturmer brothers, are sitting in the woods with a 17-year-old Ukrainian boy, and they're discussing where could they go to hide. The Ukrainian boy recounts how he was hunting several foxes the week before. and he saw these foxes run down into a sinkhole and go in a hole and disappeared. So he suggested that the next night they go there and they go look in this hole on the possibility of finding maybe an 8 by 10 room for just the Sturmer family, or maybe a fox den. In Esther's book, she describes how the next night the Sturmer boys and the Dodick boys went there, and Nathan, being the oldest, that's probably the reason why he was the one that volunteered to tie a rope on his side and climb down an embankment. Well, now and then, farmers sometimes throw their dead cattle and horses in these sinkholes. Nathan described how he had to climb through the carcasses of dead animals and how he wanted to turn around and, quite frankly, vomit. And he kept fighting that feeling because he knew this was the last chance. And he kept pushing and pushing and pushing. He never found the fox den. He never found that little 8 by 10 room. Instead, they found the 4th longest cave in the world. The Good Cave, Priest Grotto, 77 miles long. The first place we went to get information on this cave was a local caving club. We were particularly interested in these two gentlemen because they reopened the cave in 1963, and I will explain shortly how it got closed originally. We wanted to know what their notes showed about signs of human inhabitation when they first went in the cave. This is a map of half the cave that's been maintained since 1963. The map is so large, we couldn't get the whole map in the camera field of view. But these cavers, Jewish and Ukrainian, have been protecting this cave with their own time and money ever since in '63. And they've been constantly finding new passage. There's something strange about the land over here. There's nothing on the surface to indicate you have a cave. Usually you find big boulders of limestone that we call outcroppings. Here, there's nothing to indicate there are caves, just 30, 40, or 50 feet below the surface, not to mention the largest caves in the world. Next slide, please. I had the privilege in 2003 in going to Priest Grotto Cave on the same road in the same manner as did the Sturmers, as part of a group of 38 people, a total of 5 families, as they did in May of 1943, except they went late at night and they had no property. This is Priest Grotto today. Now you see that pipe on the left. That's the entrance that was put in 1963. But the Sturmers, Wexlers, and other families, they went in an entrance that was right in the center. Well, that's been closed. Mudslides, and also every April the snow will melt. That was part of a collective farm. So large tractors brought to the edge collapsed it. In 1947, the KGB went to every place they thought there'd been Bandera. The Soviet resistance fighters could hide weapons, and they dynamited the entrances. Subsequently, a new development, as of 2 years ago, we found a 91-year-old man, a 92-year-old man living in Odessa, who were members of a Bandera. They didn't just use this cave to hide weapons. It turns out it was a command center from 45 to 47. And in 47, the KGB caught 16 Bandera and machine gunned them in the entrance, too. So the story is still growing. Next slide. That's the current entrance today. Next slide. This is Priest Grotto Cave, looking down at it. In Ukrainian, it was called Popoyama, a sinkhole of the priests. The cave dwellers took up occupancy in 4 parallel passages, each passage about 80 to 60 feet long, 8 to 4 feet wide, 8 to 4 feet high. This gives you an idea of their new universe. They lived in that little red rectangle at the top of the screen. Remember what Esther said. They wanted to find a place where they were masters of their own fate. They found it. This was their world. These numbers indicate artifacts that we located. You're going to see pictures of them shortly. 19 is particularly interesting. They found a lake, a source of fresh water, which, to use Esther's own words, was big enough to row a boat across. It was with that water combined with beets and potatoes that they made soup once a day. No, back slide. So what waited for them in this cave? Some of the same bad things as in the first cave. But they had water, they had a lake. How did they eat? Well, believe it or not, things got even worse for the Jewish population in that area. The 3 people with the metal collection badges, they were in as much danger as any other Jew in the area now, because now the Edict of Judenfried took effect. So they had to stay there. What happened is each of the 5 families had 1 or 2 young males that my co-author and I dubbed as the breadwinners. And their responsibility was to go out in darkness once every 5 weeks and go get food for the respective families any way they could, knowing it would be another 5 weeks before they could go out again. So each of the 5 families had some youngster that would do that. The ages range from 15 to 21. Every other person, the young, the elderly, and the women, stayed in this cave for 344 days. Now, in most cases, they would live off beets or potatoes that they would dig up in farms nearby. They would get lucky occasionally. Esther mentioned the one case where Nathan Sturmer and his younger brother, Saul, came across a Ukrainian wedding party, and they were all passed out from having drunk a lot of vodka. He goes on to say how they, and I've been corrected, borrowed 12 ducks. And how they took the ducks back to the cave, and they not only kept them alive by putting corn in them for 2 weeks, but they ate some of them. They ate them, and they saved the feathers and made down comforters. Next. This is the current entrance. It's a 21-foot shaft. Measures 3 feet high, 2 feet wide. You have to crawl for 90 feet. Don't forget, they had to crawl an additional 70 feet behind Peter because that section collapsed. So they had to crawl 160 feet. Youngest person in the cave, Norman Kittner, 2 years old. Oldest person was a 76-year-old woman. One of the reasons the Ukrainians mistakenly thought it was the Bandera that first occupied the cave was because of this insignia near the entrance. But we now know that 38 local Jews were the first ones to occupy the cave. In Esther's book, she talked about how the little 4-year-old would disappear every so often with a candle to go play with the diamonds. We think she was looking at these crystals that fell off the ceiling near the hotkey section. By the way, the Ukrainians named the section hotkey, which is means cottage in Ukrainian. This is a base camp that we use now to do our explorations deep in the cave. Now, cavers use base camps in these big caves the way mountain climbers use base camps. You go, instead of going higher and higher and replenishing your food supply, you go deeper and deeper. This is the existing campsite that's used for this. But when the Ukrainian cavers went in the early 60s, they used the hotkey area where the Jewish people lived at first for about 3 or 4 years as their base camp. But then it started to flood. Nobody knows why, but every 20 years the water comes up, floods that section, goes down. So in the early log entries, the Ukrainian cavers described how they cleaned up that area, dug a hole, threw the trash in there, took advantage of some nearby lumber, covered it up, and they moved 400 yards further in the cave above the water level, and they built this camp. By the way, that blue flash, that's not daylight, that's the flash. We're deep in the cave here. This is a mud sign that says hotkey. The Ukrainians put it there. Steps. These steps were not dug by tools. What happened is, over the course of using the same path, month after month, the path naturally got tampered down and steps were naturally created. Esther reports that eventually the shoes on her feet fell off. And then she goes on to report how some of them, barefooted, could navigate through this section in complete darkness, using the palms of their feet the way a human uses their fingers to read Braille, in combination with whistling, because the whistling would give you the echo where you knew how large the room was that you were in. Next slide. We found artifacts like shovels. We're working with the local museum to take these artifacts and protect them and build an exhibit in Borshoff. One thing you never see occur in a cave naturally is a straight line. On our 4th day there, we were on our way out. I look down the passage and I see a straight line on the floor. Let's go back. Remember how I told you they got the food in every 5 weeks? They would send a work party out. They never used roads. They never used trails because they didn't want to accidentally run into any Germans or Ukrainians. They bushwhacked. They went through passages that they had to tear the vines out away. Imagine how difficult it was carrying 100-pound bags of potatoes through that. Picture doing that in 2 feet of snow. In Esther's book, she described the solution the Sturmer brothers came up with. A sled made in 3 parts. That's the sled. We found it. The Ukrainian cavers in the early 60s, when they said they found some lumber nearby and they covered up the trash holes, that was the sled. Next slide. Now, this wall behind me, which used to go up to the ceiling, is quite interesting. When you get up to it, next slide, please, you see charred wood on both sides. Now, when you walk over it, and remember, it used to go all the way up to the ceiling, you see that behind it, the ceiling's covered in soot and smoke, but in front it was pristine. They figured out a way to build a stove and take advantage of the natural ventilation of the cave to suck the smoke away from where they were living, so they could cook in this cave. They sealed these 4 passages either with stones or mud to cut down the draft and lower the humidity. Then we found a piece de resistance. Nathan Sturmer carried this, which is over 100 pounds, in the snow over 2.5 miles into the cave, and this allowed all 5 families to make their own bread. Another valuable tool that was described in Esther's book was a railroad spike used as a chisel. We found that. A short distance from the millstone, you crawl up towards the sleeping area. Now, you can make a left and go into the remainder of the 77 miles of cave, or make a right and go in the sleeping area. If you look at that, back up please. If you look at that brick on the right, that rock, there's something unnatural there. The rock above it in the ceiling is solid. It had to be placed there. When I picked it up, I found this, a spoon that was hidden under that rock 64 years previously. When Saul Wexler saw this spoon, tears came to his eyes. Remember now, he's by himself. He lost his mother, lost his brother, but his cousins, the Sturmers, took him in. He's a 14-year-old boy who said he felt like he was starving to death every one of 344 days. He found a solution. He volunteered to bring the prepared food back to the eating area. And on the way, in complete darkness, he would take advantage of several spoons that he hid under rocks. But he got caught and he got beaten. Unfortunately, then some other kids in the group did it, and Sal got more beatings. If you make a right, you go through the beginning of the sleeping area. Now, this wall used to go up to the ceiling. They had canvas sacks here. And 80 feet down the tunnel, they had a similar situation. And the families slept about 15 feet apart, or 5 families. What's interesting about the sleeping area is when we surveyed it, we found out it was high enough that those flood waters that would come every 20 years would never get that high. So the sleeping area, next slide, the sleeping area was just the way it was in 1944 when they left. It was a time capsule. This is a bed. They leveled down the ground with shovels. They would put pegs at the end, and they would take planks and put holes in the planks and create beds about 6 inches above the cold floor. I'm measuring some bedposts here. Each family would put their food underneath their own bed. We found buttons, keys, shoes, numerous shoes. We found a drinking mug. The pottery was interesting because when we showed this to the remaining survivors, and there's 14 in the original 38 still alive, each family, unbeknownst to us, had recognizable, unique patterns on their china. So by doing a grid, we're able to tell whose little sleeping area we're getting the artifacts from. We found a matching drinking cup in Vitaba. The lake room. This is where they found a lake big enough to row a boat across. Back then, the lake was much higher. By the way, if the lake was at its highest level, they never would have got in the cave in 1943 because the entrance floods. There was something watching out for them. The water was low enough they got in the cave. Today, it's at a low level. Then I saw these names. I had seen these names in 1993, but there were numerous names on the wall in this particular room. I didn't have the names back in 93. Now I did. Sturmer, and on the side, Dodick, and down the bottom, Karl Kurtz. On an adjacent wall, up on the top, Mundick. Wexelblad, which became anglicized to Wexler. 1943. Now remember what National Geographic told Peter and I? You have to come back with physical evidence that this story actually took place. If you look very close on the 4 and 3, you see white deposits. That's a natural process where minerals leach out of the rock and cover the surface. It takes 50 to 60 years for that to happen. we had physical evidence that 1943 was written in 1943. So listed artifacts, we're working with the local museum now to build a permanent exhibit, including these artifacts. I initiated this project this past July. Not only is the museum going to build an exhibit, a condition to get the money I donate to them is they're going to work with the local caving club's youth group, 10, 16-year-olds, and the museum will teach these kids how to be young archaeologists to work on this project, to build this exhibit. These are not Jewish kids. There are no longer any Jews in the area. In most cases, these are the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Ukrainians that lived in the area at the time. They're going to work hand in hand with the grandchildren of the Sturmers and the other families. In 1944, they had what was described as the best day of their life in Esther's manuscript. Mind you, it was covered with snow, and they came out, and Esther said, we no longer had to fear the sun. It was not our enemy. And it was emotional to all of them. And Esther said, though, their attention was soon turned towards Seema, who was crying, the 4-year-old, looking directly at the sun and just repeating several words over and over again. Please turn out the candle. Unfortunately, about that same time in the Netherlands, another young Jewish girl wrote the following in her diary. I take solace in the fact that we are safe here and we are never going to be found. It was Anne Frank. This gentleman, second from the left, he's 87. He went to school with Nathan Sturmer. But most importantly here, he's recounting the story about how after the Germans left the area, they saw, quote, 24 walking dead people coming out of the woods from nowhere. And whatever was not yellow by way of the mud on them was yellow by way of their skin. Some of them had jaundice, vitamin deficiency. Young Norman Kittner ended up wearing leg braces from the age of 3 to 8. Seema, the 4-year-old, had, as a teenager, had to have various operations on the digestive tract. Esther talked about how they walked among the villagers that were their neighbors, and no one said anything. They stayed there, the 5 families, for 4 or 6 months. They saved their money. They never told anybody where they were because they didn't know if they would have to go back. And they left. And they took this story with them. And that's where you think the story would end. But Saul Wexler is a 15-year-old now. He comes out of the cave with a 17-year-old. The 17-year-old went to check on his parents because his parents were too elderly to come in the cave. And he finds out they had been killed by locals many months before. So you got a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old. They want to get out of there. What do? The 17-year-old joins a Russian infantry unit on the way to Berlin. Saul Wexler tags along as the mascot and as an assistant in the kitchen. Eventually, Saul Wexler gets to Berlin, and a year later, he wakes up his 17-year-old friend quietly, and he says goodbye to him because he knows he's never going to see him again. And Saul had a mission. In 1937, his father, thinking there was going to be problems with the Germans, got to New York City with the intention to get his family out. But he never got the paperwork back in time. So Saul Wexler gets to New York, gets reunited to with his father. And that's where you think the story would end. But I forgot to mention, remember that manuscript that the old Ukrainian caver said about in 1991, he wrote in that manuscript, even though I didn't get any names, I figured out that in 1991, Yosef Zamil went to the dedication of this monument to honor 14,000 Jews that perished, and he met 3 Canadian brothers. And this is the monument he went to. Well, in 1991, Saul Wexler's wife was too ill to go to this dedication, but the Sturmer brothers went, and they took a videotape. And there were several hundred Jews from all over the world that went back to this place. When Saul Sturmer is looking at the videotape, he sees a familiar face standing alongside this monument. It's an old man dressed in the uniform of a Russian lieutenant colonel. It was a 17-year-old friend. And usually here I say that the Sturmer family is alive and well, but sitting in the center of the table is Saul Sturmer. Leaning on his left shoulder is Trana. She passed away of a cerebral hemorrhage this past February. Next to Saul is Sam, his younger brother. To Sal's left is a space, and next to that space is Peter, my co-author. Leaning on Sam's shoulder in the black blouse on the left is Seema, the 4-year-old. In regards to that space, that's the biggest regret Peter and I have. We never met Nathan Sturmer. He passed away a year before we made contact with the family. Do we have 5 minutes? Are we okay? Let's speed ahead. I'm going to bring you up to date on what's been going on in the last 5 years. Next slide. We have a documentary being made. The book has come out. I've continued to go back every year. Let's go ahead. This is Sonia. She was 9 years old. She's the oldest sister of Seema. This is Pearl, the surviving wife of Nathan on the right. Sal Sturmer in the middle. And Yetta Sturmer, who's 92, made Peter and I promise, if we ever show this picture, we must tell everybody in the audience what everybody said in the cave. And that is she made the best soup in the world. And we've always done that. Questions. What about God? I asked Sam Sturmer that question. Not like that. I said to both of them, did you ever think when you looked at all the things you had in the good cave to all the things you had in the bad cave that something or someone was watching over you? Sam Sturmer on the left said, let me put it like this. At the time, God wasn't in my neighborhood. Sal Sturmer on the right said, let me put it like this. When I see God, and I will see God, I have a long list of grievances. The number one question to be answered is, and it's a question National Geographic asked me, it's a question Peter asked me, it's a question a movie company asked me. This story happened, how come nobody knew about it? Sal Sturmer said, well, Chris, what did you tell Peter? I said, Peter, think of the end of the movie with Harrison Ford, Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they take this treasure and they put it up on a shelf and they lose it. I said, sadly, I think this story got lost among all the thousands of Holocaust stories, and no one saw that thin fiber to make it somewhat different to pull it out. Well, the brother said, you got it half right. And then Sal told his granddaughter here to tell me what happened when she was 8 years old. And she pleaded with her grandfather for a week to go to her class to tell the story because her classmates made fun of her. Sal went there, told the story. The next day, they made twice as much fun of her for having the crazy old grandfather with a vivid imagination. Sal and Sam then said, we realized how our friends must have felt, and to use their words, that while some of their loved ones died on the cold, lice-ridden floors of some of the camps, we were in the warmth under down comforters in a cave eating duck. They stopped telling the story because nobody would believe them. Metaphorically, the story stayed buried for 64 years until Peter and I were given this gift by them to tell this story. I've met other survivors. This is Yulo Barat. He came out of the cave, came out at 17 with nothing and with no parents. Today, he owns several hotels in Tel Aviv and several in Midtown Manhattan. Gentleman on the right, that's Mundik. I'm sorry, gentleman on the right, he's the lieutenant colonel. He smiles and he won't say anything about his experience to me in the Russian army. The woman next to him, that's the doctor's mother in Atlanta, Georgia. The fellow in the blue shirt on the upper left-hand side, Norman Kittner, the baby of the family. Incidentally, Norman brought his children with him in 2006 and we took them in the cave. The three people in the center, Mundik, brother and sister. Mundik was 15 in the yellow shirt. He wrote the names. Dorothy was 9, and Lussa was 12. In 2006, we started to shoot some preliminary video in preparation for the documentary being made. One of the people helping was that young girl, Abby, in the center, a 26-year-old NYU student. This gentleman gave me a lot of pleasure in coming as a member of the caving crew. He approached me in the summer of 2006 and said, I've read all these stories. I'll do anything to be able to go back and help you. Except there's a problem. I'm claustrophobic and I'm petrified of the dark. Spent the whole summer in 2006 taking him in caves. First cave he went into, he said, the last time I was this scared I was 12 and I couldn't complete the little tunnel in the McDonald's Playland. Anyway, he did it. He came with us in 2006, and he was one of our assistants. At one point, we were going to do some filming, and we were at a campsite, and something went wrong. one of the gas canisters, butane canisters, blew up. And as I walked back into the campsite, this ball of fire came at me. And out of that ball of fire was our Ukrainian guide, Sergei, who was on flame on the chest and the pants. Meanwhile, that ball of fire continued in this direction. And I did what's called triage. I had to make a decision immediately. Who or whatever was in that ball of fire was dead. But I could recognize Sergei. I went up to him and I got down on my knees to try and help put out the flames in his pants. And he was working on the chest, and then the flames jumped to me. A very brave French-Canadian caver who was getting ready to go to sleep that night and had only on polypropylene underwear jumped on both of us, and all three of us rolled over. That ball of fire I mentioned, that was Abby. She was on flame from her feet to her shoulders. She ran by this gentleman. He pushed her on the ground and rolled over and probably saved her life. This is Nathan Sturmer's grandson. So, it may be something to the saying that possibly heroism is connected to heredity. Next slide. He got to see where his grandfather grew up and his neighbors. Next slide. He got to see where his grandparents are buried. By the way, he's still instrumental now. He's working with those kids I mentioned earlier to help build this exhibit in Borshoff. He got to see the legendary millstone that he heard about every day of his life from his grandfather. And here, I think a picture's worth 1,000 words. He got to see his grandfather's name in the cave. Saul Wexler, he's alive and well. We have dinner once a month, and he tells me that if he has a good day, he will be at affairs like this. And he's escorted me to these affairs. But then he says if he has a bad day, meaning his health, his job is to rest up to have another good day. This is the extended Sturmer family today, and when I see this, I can't help thinking of the question, how many would have been doctors? How many would have been lawyers? How many would have been psychologists or businessmen? To me, this picture answers the question. Damn. Before your applause, one question that's usually asked to me is, as a Gentile, how did this story affect you? Well, I grew up hearing about the atrocities committed against the slaves, against the Native Americans, and I grew up hearing about the number 6 million. But I'll be honest with you, as a Gentile, whether it be 5 million or 6 million or 7 million, it was a large number. Now, I hate to quote somebody like Stalin, but Stalin once said, "The loss of one individual is a personal tragedy. Thank goodness the loss of millions is nothing but a mere statistic." After looking into the eyes of the people involved in this story and doing an interview, I finally realized the Holocaust is not one story of how 6 million people perished. It's 6 million individual stories of how loved ones, fathers, mothers, daughters, and sons perished. And the number became overwhelming. Thank you.